We've just completed our second aerial refueling. 6 fighters now pushing northeast in tight formation. What happens in the skies above Europe's eastern flank will determine whether Europeans remain masters of their own fate, or become spectators in a contest decided by others. To frame what follows, let's work with a simple idea. There are roughly 3 types of conflicts that shape modern military aviation strategy. And today, flying aboard a tanker aircraft over the North Sea, all 3 feel very real. Banking right, heading 056 northeast. We're operating as a full combat package: fighters, a tanker, a strategic transport, and an airborne radar platform. This is not a training exercise. This is France projecting military power, fast and far, into Allied airspace. Welcome to the far north of Sweden. I'm here for 10 days on what I'd describe as one of the most illuminating journeys I've undertaken as a journalist covering geopolitics. This trip combines 2 things I find genuinely fascinating: understanding the strategic fault lines currently reshaping Europe, and getting an up-close look at a military capability that most people have never seen in action. That capability is a triptych, 3 aircraft types that work together as a single system: a fighter, a tanker, a transport, each extraordinary on its own. Together, they give a country like France something rare in today's world: true strategic autonomy. The departure base is somewhere in France. I won't dwell on the geography. What matters is that within a few hours of takeoff, aircraft from multiple French bases are converging mid-air, assembling into a single coordinated package over international airspace. That fact alone says something important. This isn't a scramble. It's a rehearsed capability, practiced regularly, built over decades of operational experience. The first aircraft I board is the A330 MRTT, the tanker. Multi-role transport tanker. The name tells you everything. This machine was built from the start to do several things at once. Its airframe is essentially a wide-body commercial jet. Inside, you can configure it for passengers, up to 272 in a high-density layout. But the fuel doesn't live in the cabin. It lives in the wings and under the fuselage, completely separate. That means you can carry a full load of troops or equipment and simultaneously refuel fighters in flight. The 2 missions don't compete with each other. They coexist. Sitting in the cockpit and listening to the radio traffic between aircraft, I start to understand just how choreographed all of this is. Every aircraft has a role. Every rendezvous has a time and a position. Miss the window and the whole sequence starts to unravel. The refueling itself is stranger than I expected. Everything in conventional aviation tells you to stay away from other aircraft. Aerial refueling asks you to do the exact opposite: to fly a multi-ton jet close enough to thread a probe into a basket roughly a meter in diameter, both aircraft moving at several hundred kilometers per hour in the turbulent slipstream behind the tanker. The pilots describe it as one of the most technically demanding maneuvers in military aviation. Watching it happen in real time, I believe them completely. When the connection is made, fuel flows at roughly a ton per minute. In operational terms, this changes everything. A fighter that would otherwise need to turn back can stay in the fight. A round trip from metropolitan France to Libya, to the Middle East, to the Baltic, all of it becomes possible without landing, without rearming at a foreign base, without depending on anyone else's infrastructure. That independence is the whole point. There's also a platform that draws far less attention but plays an equally essential role: the Airborne Early Warning aircraft. Once you leave your home country's airspace, the ground radar network disappears. You're operating in a partially blind environment. The AEW platform solves that problem. It's a flying radar, orbiting at altitude, building a complete picture of everything moving in the surrounding airspace, and feeding that information to the fighters in real time. Friend or foe, range, bearing, closure rate, the fighters know. Without it, the whole package loses a critical layer of situational awareness. I caught only a brief glimpse of it in the vast sky above the North Sea. Deliberate, probably. Discretion is part of the job. Thousands of feet below, the landscape shifts. The dense Scandinavian forests come into view, partially snow-covered even at this time of year. We're approaching the far north of Sweden, and I find myself thinking about why we're here and what it means. Europe's eastern flank is a concept that sounds abstract until you're actually standing in it. Geographically, it runs from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the eastern Mediterranean in the south, the Baltic Sea, Central Europe, the Black Sea, the Balkans, the Caucasus. It's vast, diverse, and deeply unsettled. What unites all of these regions is that they represent the zone where European sovereignty is most actively contested. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that contestation has taken on a character that many Europeans thought belonged to history. Wars of territorial conquest, forced border changes, the use of military force to redraw the map. For decades, the assumption held that this era was over. It wasn't. The following morning, standing at a viewpoint above the Swedish forest, I take stock of where we are. Not just geographically, but strategically. The airbase where we've landed sits near Luleå, in the Gulf of Bothnia, close to the Finnish border. It is one of the northernmost NATO installations on the continent. The proximity to Russia's Kola Peninsula, home to a significant portion of its nuclear and naval forces, makes this place more than just a dot on the map. It is, in a very concrete sense, a frontline position in whatever the new European security architecture is going to look like. Sweden's accession to NATO was not inevitable. For decades, neutrality was both a policy and an identity. What changed was the calculation of risk. In a neighborhood where territorial integrity can no longer be taken for granted, neutrality stopped being a shield and started looking like a vulnerability. The decision to join the alliance was, in that sense, a rational response to a transformed strategic environment. What I find most interesting about this particular mission is the logic it embodies. France isn't here because it was asked to be here in a passive sense. France is here because it has made a deliberate choice to demonstrate, in concrete operational terms, that European security is something it is willing and able to contribute to, at range, at speed, with genuine military capability. The triptych makes that possible. The Rafale is the strike and air superiority component, a mature, nuclear-capable platform with a naval variant, designed to operate across the full spectrum of air combat. The A330 MRTT is the enabler, the aircraft that transforms a short-range tactical fighter into a strategic tool by removing the fuel constraint. And the A400M, which I'll board on the final day, is the logistical backbone, the platform that gets everything else where it needs to go, including into environments where no commercial aircraft could ever land. Together, these three aircraft represent a doctrine as much as a capability. The doctrine is this: France can deploy a credible combat force to almost anywhere in the world, within hours, without relying on foreign bases, foreign infrastructure, or foreign permission. That's what strategic autonomy actually means in practice. Not independence from allies. France is here, after all, working alongside Sweden, Norway, Finland, Poland, and NATO, but independence from dependency. The ability to act when others cannot or will not. Back on the tarmac, the Rafales and Swedish Gripens line up side by side. The visual contrast is striking. The Rafale is a larger, heavier aircraft, designed by a country with global ambitions, overseas territories on every ocean, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, a history of out-of-area operations stretching back decades. Its design reflects those ambitions: long-range, multi-role, nuclear-capable, carrier-compatible. The Gripen is leaner, designed with a very different set of requirements in mind. Sweden's air power doctrine was historically built around defending national airspace, not projecting force abroad, but denying adversaries the ability to dominate Swedish skies. One of its most distinctive features is the ability to operate from dispersed locations, including roads through the forest, using short runway lengths that would be impossible for most military aircraft. That capability wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate response to the threat of an adversary targeting fixed air bases in the opening hours of a conflict. Two aircraft, two doctrines. What's remarkable is how well they work together. Mixed formations, mutual support, shared tactics. Air power, as I've come to understand it on this trip, is never about a single platform. It's about combining different capabilities to cover each other's weaknesses. The Rafale brings range, payload, and nuclear deterrence. The Gripen brings agility and survivability in a contested, dispersed environment. Together, they cover more of the threat spectrum than either could alone. The afternoon training flight departs. The fighters tear into the sky and disappear over the tree line. The base goes quiet. I find myself thinking about what's at stake in this region right now, not in abstract terms, but practically. Europe's eastern flank in 2025 is a stress test. The Europeans are being tested on multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the difficulty is compounded by the fact that the tests don't stop. There's the immediate, high-stakes challenge of supporting Ukraine, providing military, financial, and political backing to a country under invasion without triggering a direct military confrontation with a nuclear-armed state. That's a genuinely novel strategic problem, and Europe has been navigating it in real time since 2022. But beneath that headline challenge, there are constant lower-intensity pressures. Cyber operations against critical infrastructure, manipulation of migration flows, energy coercion, provocations in the Baltic airspace and maritime domain. These aren't random acts of hostility. They're part of a deliberate strategy of attrition, an attempt to exhaust European political will, fragment European unity, and drive a wedge between Europe and the United States. The United States factor complicates everything. Since World War II, American strategic engagement in Europe has been the foundational guarantee underwriting NATO's deterrence. That guarantee is now openly in question. American administrations, regardless of party, are increasingly asking European allies to bear more of the burden, or questioning whether the burden is worth bearing at all. For Europe, this is not an abstract debate. It's a direct challenge to the security architecture that has underpinned continental stability for 80 years. Final day. Boarding the A400M. If the Rafale is the sword and the MRTT is the fuel line that keeps it sharp, the A400M is the system that makes the whole thing deployable. It carried ammunition for the fighters, spare parts, tires, maintenance equipment, everything needed to sustain combat operations in a forward location that has no pre-positioned supplies. And once those supplies are delivered, the A400M doesn't park and wait. It conducts its own operations. Airdrops, paratroop insertion, resupply under fire if necessary. What makes it operationally distinctive is where it can go. A commercial airliner needs 2,000 to 3,000 meters of paved, prepared runway. The A400M, with its reinforced undercarriage distributing 141 tons of maximum takeoff weight across 14 wheels, can operate from sand, grass, or compacted dirt, and land in under 1,000 meters. That means it can reach places no other heavy transport can reach, places close to the actual point of need, rather than a well-equipped airport several hundred kilometers from the front. In the architecture of modern high-intensity warfare, that matters enormously. Logistics is not a secondary concern. It is, arguably, the primary one. Armies and air forces that can sustain themselves in austere, contested environments have a decisive advantage over those that depend on fixed, predictable infrastructure. The A400M is France's answer to that challenge. As we bank for our final approach, I look out over the snow-dusted Swedish landscape one last time. 10 days, 4 countries, dozens of aircraft movements, thousands of nautical miles, all of it in service of a single, clear message. France is here. It can get here quickly, and it can operate effectively once it arrives. That message is directed partly at allies, reassurance that the commitment is real and the capability exists. But it's also directed at adversaries, a demonstration that Europe's eastern flank is defended, that its airspace is monitored, and that any attempt to exploit the region's vulnerabilities will be met with a credible response. Whether Europe is ultimately up to the strategic challenges it faces is an open question. The politics are complicated, the pressures are relentless, and the margin for error is narrow. But what I've seen over these 10 days suggests that at least one piece of the puzzle is in place. The hardware exists, the training is serious, and the will, at least among the men and women I've flown with, is genuine. The rest is up to the politicians.